In the unforgiving heart of the Wild West, where the sun bleeds across a cracked and barren land, a woman's life was worth less than a canteen of water. Elara Vance had lost everything: her family, her future, her hope. Starving and hunted by the ghosts of her past, she made a decision born of pure desperation. She stumbled into the camp of her sworn enemies and fell before their most fearsome warrior, a giant of a man known as Nachok. With her last breath, she begged him to take her as his wife, an act that would shatter a fragile peace and set them on a collision course with a brutal conspiracy. This isn't just a story of survival. It's the true account of how one desperate plea forged an unbreakable bond and transformed two souls forever. The Arizona sun was a merciless god, and Elara Vance was its forgotten sacrifice. It had been weeks, or perhaps a lifetime, since the world had collapsed into a nightmare of dust, blood, and the splintering of wood. The memory of the raid was a splinter in her mind, sharp and festering. The faces of her mother and father, etched with terror before being consumed by the chaos, haunted her waking hours and starved her of sleep. Now there was only the gnawing emptiness in her belly and the rasp of her own breath in the vast, silent expanse of the desert. Her fine Boston dress was a tattered ruin clinging to a frame that had shed its softness for the sharp, brittle angles of starvation. She was no longer Elara Vance, the daughter of a hopeful merchant seeking a new life in the West. She was a ghost, a whisper of a girl being erased by the elements. Her feet, raw and bleeding inside the remnants of her leather boots, carried her onward with no destination in mind. Survival was a primal instinct, a flickering ember she fanned with every agonizing step. She followed a dry creek bed, praying it would lead to water, to life. Instead, it led her to them. The scent of wood smoke reached her first, a ghost of a memory of warmth and safety that made her sob. Peeking over a ridge of sun-baked rock, she saw it the Apache camp. It was a small settlement of hide-covered wickiups, nestled in a canyon, shielded from the wind. Horses grazed placidly, and the sounds of a living, breathing community drifted up to her, the murmur of voices, the cry of a child. Fear cold and sharp pierced through the fog of her exhaustion. These were the people she had been taught to dread, the savages, whispered about in campfire stories, the very people she blamed for the massacre of her family. Her first instinct was to flee, to let the desert claim her, rather than face them. But as she turned, a wave of dizziness washed over her, and her legs buckled. She knew she would not make it another mile. Death was here, waiting patiently. If she was to die, would it be better to perish alone and unheard, or to face her fate head-on, a flicker of defiance, the last remnant of the woman she used to be ignited within her? She would not die like a withered plant. She would face her executioners. With a resolve born of utter hopelessness, she scrambled down the rocky incline, stumbling and sliding, until she landed in a heap at the edge of the camp. All activity ceased. The murmuring voices fell silent, replaced by a tense, watchful stillness. Faces framed by long black hair turned toward her. Women paused their work, and men reached for the knives at their belts. Their dark eyes held no pity, only a cold, hard curiosity. Her gaze swept over them, searching until it landed on him. He emerged from the largest wickiup, ducking his head to clear the entrance. The stories had not done him justice. He was a giant, not just in height, which was well over 6 feet, but in the sheer breadth of his shoulders and the powerful column of his neck. His face was a mask of hard lines and shadows dominated by a strong jaw and eyes that seemed to hold the ancient patience of the mountains themselves. His bare chest and arms were a tapestry of faded scars, each one a testament to a life of conflict. This was a man forged from the very rock and heat of the land. This was a leader, a warrior. As he strode toward her, the others parted like reeds in a river. His presence was an undeniable force of nature. Elara felt a tremor of pure primal fear, but her desperation was stronger. This was her last insane gamble. She pushed herself to her knees, the sharp pebbles digging into her skin. Her voice, when it came, was a dry, cracked whisper, a sound she barely recognized as her own. "Please!" She rasped, her eyes locked on the giant warrior. He stopped a few feet from her, his shadow falling over her like a shroud. He said nothing, his expression unreadable. Tears she thought had long since dried up, burned tracks through the grime on her cheeks. She had nothing to offer, nothing to bargain with. No dowry, no family name, no skills that would be of any use here. She had only herself, this broken, starving shell. She had to offer the only thing a woman in her position could. "Take me." She begged, the words tumbling out in a rush of air. "Take me as your wife. I will serve you. I will work for you. I will do anything. Just don't let me die out here." A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. A woman of the white eyes, a Tejano, begging to be wed to an Apache warrior. It was an unthinkable, outrageous proposition. She saw scorn and disbelief in the faces around her. The giant warrior. Nachok didn't move. His gaze was intense, analytical, as if he were assessing a strange wounded animal that had wandered into his territory. He looked at her tattered dress, her sunburnt skin, the wild, pleading terror in her blue eyes. He saw not a woman, but a symbol of the world that was relentlessly encroaching on his own, a world of broken treaties and bloodshed. And yet he also saw a human being, stripped bare of everything but the will to live. It was a will he understood. He had seen it in warriors fighting to their last breath, in women defending their children from soldiers. In her desperate, insane plea, there was a flicker of a spirit that had refused to be extinguished. He knelt, bringing his face level with hers. The proximity was overwhelming. She could smell the scent of leather smoke and the clean, dusty aroma of the desert on his skin. The wife of an Apache warrior is a pillar of her people. He said, his voice, a low, rumbling baritone that vibrated through her. She is strong. She knows the earth. She provides. You are none of these things. You are a ghost. I can learn, she whispered, her gaze unwavering. I will be strong. He was silent for a long moment, the fate of her world hanging in the balance of his decision. To accept her would be to invite trouble to sow dissent among his own people. To refuse her was to condemn her to a certain agonizing death. His decision would not be one of pity or of desire. It would be a choice that would set in motion a chain of events he could not possibly foresee, a decision that would forever alter the course of not only her life, but his own. The entire camp held its breath, waiting for the giant to speak. A murmur of dissent rippled through the Apache onlookers. A hawk-faced warrior with a cruel slash of a mouth and eyes like obsidian chips stepped forward. His name was Geron, and his animosity toward the white settlers was a living flame. Nachok. Geron's voice was sharp, cutting through the tense silence. She is one of them, the ones who poison our water and slaughter the buffalo. Her presence here is an insult to the spirits of our ancestors, killed by her kind. Leave her for the coyotes. It is a kinder fate than she deserves. Several other warriors grunted in agreement. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. She was a lamb surrounded by wolves, and she had just thrown herself at the feet of their alpha. Nachok didn't look at Geron. His dark, impenetrable gaze remained fixed on Ilara. He saw the flicker of defiance in her eyes waver, replaced by the stark terror of her predicament. He saw past the grime and the rags to the fine bones of her face and the startling sky blue of her eyes, a color as alien to this land as she was. He saw a life fragile and unwanted, laid bare at his feet. He rose to his full imposing height, turning his back on Ilara to face his people. His authority was a palpable force, silencing the grumbling before it could grow. Geron speaks with the bitterness of his own loss, Nachok said, his voice carrying effortlessly across the clearing. His anger is a strong current, but it flows from a river of pain we have all drunk from. Yet we are Apache. We are the end the people. We are not butchers who leave the helpless to die of thirst. He turned his head slightly, his eyes finding an older woman sitting by a cook fire, her face a beautiful mask of wrinkles, her hands never ceasing their work of grinding mesquite beans. Ishtar, this woman is starving. See that she is given water and broth. Not too much at once. Ishtar nodded, once her expression unreadable, and rose with the slow, deliberate grace of her age. Nachok then addressed the camp at large. She is not my wife. He declared the words, striking a blow to Ilara's desperate hope. A wife is chosen. This is a matter of survival, not union. She will remain under my protection. She will be given work. She will earn her keep. If her spirit is strong enough to survive our ways, she will live. If it is weak, the desert will claim her in its own time. No Apache hand will be raised against her. This is my word. His word was law. Geron glared his hand, clenching at his side, but he said no more. The tension broke, and the camp slowly returned to its daily rhythms, though now their activities were punctuated by furtive, curious glances toward the strange white woman who had collapsed at their border. Ishtar approached Ilara, a clay bowl of water in her hands. She helped Ilara to sit up, her touch surprisingly gentle but firm. "Drink slowly," the old woman commanded, in broken, heavily accented English. "Too fast you die." Ilara obeyed, sipping the cool water with a reverence she had never before known. Each swallow was a prayer, answered, a spark of life rekindled in her desiccated body. Ishtar then gave her a small bowl of thin, savory broth. It was the most exquisite meal she had ever tasted. Nachok watched for a moment, before turning and disappearing back inside his wickiup. The decision was made. He had taken on the weight of her life, and now he and his people would have to bear the consequences. The days that followed were a blur of pain, confusion, and grueling adjustment for Ilara. She was given a space in Ishtar's wickiup, a small corner that felt both like a cage and a sanctuary. Her body, ravaged by starvation, ached with a profound weakness. Ishtar was a strict but fair taskmaster. She showed Ilara how to scrape hides until her arms burned and her hands blistered, how to find the edible roots that clung to life beneath the baked earth, and how to grind corn into meal with a heavy stone, a repetitive back-breaking chore that seemed to last an eternity. The language barrier was a formidable wall. Ishtar spoke a few words of English, Nachok a few more, but the daily life of the camp was conducted entirely in the flowing, guttural language of the Apache. Ilara was an outsider in every sense, deaf and mute in a world of complex social rules she could not comprehend. The women mostly ignored her, their silence a heavy blanket of disapproval. The children, however, were mercilessly curious, pointing at her pale skin and sun-bleached hair, sometimes darting in to touch her before running away with shrieks of laughter. But it was Geron and his followers who were her true tormentors. They never touched her. Nachok's decree was absolute, but their hatred was a constant, oppressive presence. They would spit on the ground as she passed, mutter insults, just loud enough for her to feel their venom, and watch her every fumbling attempt at her chores with unconcealed contempt. They were waiting for her to fail to prove that Nachok's decision had been a foolish one. Nachok himself remained a distant, enigmatic figure. He provided for her, ensuring she had a share of any meat he brought back from the hunt, but he rarely spoke to her directly. She would see him at dawn, standing atop the highest ridge, a solitary silhouette against the rising sun. She watched him train the young boys, his movements with a bow and arrow, a fluid, deadly dance. He was power grace, and a deep, unsettling stillness all at once. His protection was the only thing keeping her alive, yet it felt as conditional as the shifting desert sands. One evening as she sat outside Ishtar's wickiup, trying to mend a tear in a hide with a clumsy bone needle, Nachok approached. He sat on a rock nearby, not looking at her but at the fire. "The white soldiers at Fort Grant have a new commander," he said, his English slow and deliberate. "They call him Captain Thorn. He is a man who believes the only good Apache is a dead one. His patrols come closer every day." Ilara's head snapped up. Fort Grant. That was near where her family had been headed. The name Thorn meant nothing to her, but the mention of soldiers sent a chill down her spine. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her voice still rough. "Because you are a weakness in this camp," he stated bluntly without malice. It was a simple fact. "Your presence, if discovered, would give Thorn the excuse he needs to attack us. You are a danger to us all." The weight of his words settled on her like a physical blow. She wasn't just a burden. She was a liability, a potential catalyst for the destruction of the very people who had saved her. "Then why did you do it?" she whispered, her hands trembling. "Why did you let me stay?" Nachok finally turned his head, and his dark eyes met hers in the flickering firelight. For the first time she saw something beyond the stoic warrior. She saw a flicker of conflict, of a heavy burden borne alone. "My younger sister," he began, his voice dropping so low it was almost lost to the crackling flames, "was captured in a raid by Mexican soldiers many winters ago. She was your age. They left her in the desert without water when they were done with her. We found her, but it was too late. Her spirit had already begun its journey." He looked away toward the vast, star-dusted darkness of the desert. "When I looked at you," he continued, "I did not see a white woman. I saw her, and I could not let the desert take another." In that moment, Ilara understood. His decision had not been about her at all. It was an attempt to quiet a ghost from his own past, a debt he was paying to a long-lost sister. She was a proxy for his pain, a living reminder of his failure to protect his own blood. The knowledge was a strange comfort and a new kind of sorrow. She was safe, but she was not wanted. She was a symbol, not a person. And she knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that she would have to become far more than a symbol if she was ever to truly survive in this place. Weeks bled into months. The blistering heat of summer slowly gave way to the crisp, cool nights of autumn. Ilara's body, once a fragile vessel of weakness, began to change. The endless work hardened her hands and strengthened her limbs. The sun darkened her skin, and the meager but consistent diet filled out her gaunt frame. The physical transformation was stark, but it was the internal shift that was most profound. She began to see the world not through the eyes of Ilara Vance of Boston, but through the lens of the Ende. Ishtar, in her own gruff way, became her teacher. She taught Ilara not just with words, but with actions. She showed her how the yucca plant could provide not only food, but also strong fibers for weaving and soap for washing. She taught her which clays were best for pottery, and how to read the subtle shifts in the wind that foretold a coming storm. Ilara learned that the desert which she had once seen as a barren wasteland was in fact a bountiful and generous mother if you knew her language. Ilara's own language skills improved as well. She picked up the Apache words for water, tafayako, and food, idomo her vocabulary, growing word by painstaking word. The children, once her tormentors, became her accidental tutors, their simple, direct questions, forcing her to learn and respond. Her progress was slow and her accent was clumsy, but she was no longer deaf and mute in their world. Her relationship with Nachok remained one of distant formal protection. Yet she found herself studying him, piecing together the man from the fragments she observed. He was revered not just for his size and strength, but for his wisdom. He settled disputes with a calm, unassailable logic, and his knowledge of the terrain was legendary. He could track a single deer over miles of solid rock and find water where others saw only dust. But there was a deep well of sorrow in him, one he kept carefully hidden. Ilara saw it in the moments he thought no one was watching, when his gaze would drift to the horizon, and his face would settle into lines of profound grief. She knew about his sister, but she sensed there was more to his story, more scars than the ones that mapped his skin. One afternoon, while she was helping Ishtar prepare a poultice of herbs, she finally found the courage to ask, "Ishtar," she began, her Apache still halting. "Nachok, his sadness. Is it only for his sister?" Ishtar's hand stilled. The old woman looked at Ilara, her dark eyes seeming to weigh the younger woman's heart. Finally she nodded. "It is a wound with 2 blades, she said softly. The loss of his sister and the loss of his wife. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. His wife? Her name was Chimalis, Ishtar said, her voice filled with an old pain. The morning star. She was as bright as her name. She and their son, a small boy of 2 winters, were with him on a hunt. They were ambushed, not by soldiers, by white men, looking for gold men with greedy hearts and no honor. Nachok fought like a cornered mountain lion. He killed them all. But not before they... Ishtar's voice broke, and she made a sharp cutting motion with her hand. Not before they took his world from him. He carries them both on his shoulders. That is why he is a giant. His grief gives him his size. The story settled in Ilara's heart like a stone. It recontextualized everything: his stoicism, his reluctance to connect, his initial reaction to her. He didn't just see his sister in her desperation. He saw the very people who had destroyed his life. His decision to save her was not just an act of penance for his sister, but an act of profound, almost unbelievable forgiveness. The knowledge deepened her respect for him into something more complex, something that made her chest ache whenever she looked at him. It was during the season of the piñón nut harvest that the first major twist in Ilara's own story began to unravel. The tribe had traveled to a higher elevation, where the trees were plentiful. It was a time of community and relative plenty. One evening, around a large communal fire, some of the warriors were recounting tales of recent skirmishes and raids. Ilara, sitting on the periphery with the women, listened, her understanding of the language now good enough to follow the main threads of the conversation. Giron was speaking, his voice boastful. He described a recent raid on a freight wagon carrying rifles to a mining camp. Then another warrior, a man named Taza, began to speak of a different raid, one that had happened months before, in the summer. It was the Tejano cattle baron Blackwood, Taza said. His men are brazen. They drove a herd right through the canyon of Whispering Spirits, a sacred place. We followed them. We saw them meet with another group of white eyes. Ilara's attention sharpened. Her family's wagon had been part of a small train, but they were headed toward the fertile lands near Crimson Creek Lands that the powerful rancher Jebediah Blackwood was rumored to be buying up by any means necessary. They were disguised, Taza continued, oblivious to Ilara's sudden stillness. Dressed like us. They had painted their faces. They carried our arrows stolen from a raid 2 seasons ago. Blackwood gave them money. Then they rode east. East. Toward the path her family's wagon train had been on. A cold dread, slick and oily, coiled in Ilara's stomach. Disguised. Paid by a white man. The timeline fit perfectly. She had been told it was an Apache raid. The arrow that had grazed her arm, the one she pulled out before she fled into the wilderness, had Apache markings. All this time, her hatred, her fear, the very foundation of her trauma, had been directed at the wrong people. The people who had saved her were the very people she had unjustly blamed for her family's murder. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The faces around the fire faces she had come to know to respect, and in some cases to fear, swam before her eyes. The laughter and conversation faded into a dull roar in her ears. Her family had not been killed by savages in a random act of violence. They had been executed. It was a calculated assassination orchestrated by a man named Jebediah Blackwood and designed to look like an Indian raid. Why the land? An old grudge. She felt a hand on her shoulder and flinched, looking up to see Nutchok standing over her. He had seen the color drain from her face, the horror dawning in her eyes. He had been watching her, and he had heard Taza's story. Their eyes met across the firelight, and in his gaze she saw not suspicion, but a dawning, terrible understanding. He knew what she had just realized. The splinter of memory in her mind shifted, and a new, terrible image surfaced, the face of one of the attackers glimpsed for a second in the chaos. He had been painted, yes, but beneath the paint his eyes had been a pale, cold blue. The eyes of a white man. The revelation shattered the fragile peace Ilara had built for herself. The grief for her family, which had been a dull, constant ache, returned with a vengeance, now sharpened by the jagged edge of betrayal. It wasn't the Apache who were the savages. It was men from her own world, men who wore the mask of civilization, while hiding hearts black with greed. She withdrew into herself, the shock rendering her silent and distant. Ishtar watched her with worried eyes, but left her to her thoughts. It was Nutchok who finally broke through her wall of silence. He found her by the small stream that ran through the mountains, where she sat staring into the water, her knuckles white as she gripped a smooth grey stone. He did not speak at first, simply sitting on the bank a few feet away. His presence was a quiet, solid anchor in her swirling sea of turmoil. "The truth is a heavy stone," he said at last. "It can be used to build a foundation, or it can be used to drown." Ilara finally looked at him, her blue eyes shimmering with unshed tears of rage and sorrow. "All this time," she whispered, her voice hoarse, "I hated your people. I blamed you, while the man who gave the order lives and breathes and profits from my parents' graves. Hate is a fire that consumes the one who carries it." Nutchok replied, his voice calm and steady. "Justice is a different path. It is a path of thorns, but it leads to clear water." "What justice?" She shot back, a spark of her old fire returning. "Who will believe me? A woman who has been living with the Apache? They'll call me a liar, a traitor. They'll say I've gone native. Blackwood is a rich man, a powerful man." "Power is not the same as truth," Nutchok said. "But you are right. Your word alone is not enough. You need proof." The way he said it with such simple certainty made her look at him again. He was not just offering empty comfort. He was offering a solution. He was offering a partnership. What are you saying?" "Crimson Creek is a 2-day ride from here," he said, turning his gaze toward the distant peaks that lay in the direction of the settlement. "It is a place of foolish men and poison water they call whiskey. But it is where this Blackwood lives. It is where you might find answers. You would go with me." The question was a breath of disbelief. For him to leave the relative safety of his territory and ride into a white settlement, a place where he would be met with hatred and suspicion, was an incredible risk. To do it for her, the woman who was a living liability to his tribe, was unthinkable. "I told you," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "This is a path of thorns. It is not wise to walk it alone." The decision was a momentous one, and it was not met with approval. When Nachok announced his intention to the tribe's council of elders, Geron was openly furious. "You would risk your life for this White Eye's revenge," he spat, gesturing dismissively at Elara, who stood behind Nachok. "She has brought nothing but trouble. Let her ghosts rest. Our concern is for the people, not the squabbles of the Tejanos. Blackwood's greed will not end with her family." Nachok countered his voice, resonating with authority. "He used our likeness to commit his crime. He turns the soldiers against us with his lies. His poison infects the land and will eventually reach us. Her fight is now our fight. I will ride to Crimson Creek. I will see the truth of this." His standing was such that none could forbid him, but the dissent was clear. He was choosing to help an outsider, and in doing so, he was placing himself and his bond with his people in jeopardy. They prepared for the journey. Ishtar gave Elara a set of practical buckskin leggings and a tunic a far cry from the restrictive dresses of her past. She also gave her a small leather pouch filled with dried herbs for healing. "The world of your people has made you sick," the old woman said. "Do not let it do so again." As they were about to leave, Nachok presented Elara with a horse, a sturdy mare with a gentle temperament. As she reached out to stroke the mare's neck, her hand brushed against Nachok's. An unexpected jolt like a spark of static electricity passed between them. It was the first time they had touched since that first desperate day, and the brief contact was startlingly intimate. Elara pulled her hand back, as if burned, her cheeks flushing. Nachok's expression remained impassive, but she saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a depth she hadn't seen before. The journey to Crimson Creek was a revelation. Traveling alone with Nachok, Elara saw a different side of him. He was no longer just the stoic leader, but a patient teacher. He showed her how to read the tracks of animals in the dust, how to find their way by the position of the sun and stars, and how to move silently through the brush. He spoke more than he ever had in the camp, telling her the Apache names for the mountains and the stories of the spirits that inhabited them. For the first time, they were not the Apache giant and the white refugee. They were simply two people moving through a vast and beautiful landscape bound by a shared purpose. The silence between them became comfortable, punctuated by moments of easy conversation. A bond forged in desperation and tempered by shared hardship was now beginning to anneal into something stronger, something warmer. One night, huddled by a small smokeless fire, a sudden cold snap sent a shiver through Elara. Without a word, Nachok removed the heavy buffalo hide he used as a cloak and draped it over her shoulders. The hide was heavy and smelled of him, of smoke leather and pine. The warmth that enveloped her was more than just physical. It was a gesture of care, of profound and quiet intimacy. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. He simply nodded his eyes on the flames. "Sleep," he said. "We reach the town of wolves tomorrow." As she drifted off to sleep, wrapped in his warmth, Ilara realized with a startling clarity that her feelings for this man had grown far beyond gratitude and respect. In the heart of the imposing warrior who had saved her life, she had found a kindness and an honor she had never known. She was falling in love with him, and the knowledge was as terrifying as it was exhilarating. This path of thorns was leading her not just toward justice for her past, but toward a future she could never have imagined. Crimson Creek was less a town and more a festering sore on the face of the desert. It consisted of a single dusty street flanked by a ramshackle collection of wooden buildings, a saloon belching out tinny piano music, a general store, a blacksmith and a sheriff's office that looked more like a cage. The air was thick with the smell of cheap whiskey manure and unwashed bodies. As they rode into town, a hush fell over the street. The sight of a giant Apache warrior riding alongside a white woman dressed in buckskin was enough to stop every drunk cowboy and merchant in their tracks. Faces peered out from behind dirty windows, their expressions a mixture of shock, suspicion, and raw, undisguised hatred. "Keep your eyes forward," Nachok murmured, his voice a low rumble. "Do not show fear. It is blood in the water to men like these." Ilara held her head high, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She felt the weight of 100 hostile stares, heard the muttered insults. Squaw man, traitor, savage. This had been her world, and now she was a complete stranger to it, an object of contempt. Their first stop was the office of the town doctor. Ilara remembered Dr. Samuel Finch as a kind elderly man who had treated her for a fever years ago when her family had first passed through the territory. If anyone would help, it was him. They found him in his small surgery, a cluttered room that smelled of carbolic acid and herbs. Dr. Finch was a frail-looking man with spectacles perched on his nose and a gentle, weary face. He looked up as they entered, and his eyes widened in astonishment when he recognized Ilara. "Good heavens! Ilara Vance! We all thought you perished with your family." "I survived, Dr. Finch," Ilara said, her voice steady. "And I have come back to find out why they died." She quickly explained everything: the raid, her survival, her time with the Apache, and what Taza had overheard about Jebediah Blackwood. As she spoke, Nachok stood silently by the door, a formidable, watchful presence that discouraged any interruption. Dr. Finch listened, his expression growing more troubled with her every word. When she finished, he took off his spectacles and rubbed his tired eyes. "Jebediah Blackwood," he sighed. "That man has a stranglehold on this whole valley. He arrived a few years ago with a fortune of unknown origin and has been buying up land ever since. He's ruthless, Ilara. He has the sheriff a nasty piece of work named Hank Cobb in his pocket, accusing him of murder. That's a death sentence." "I don't need to accuse him publicly," Ilara countered. "Not yet. I need proof. The land my father filed a claim for the plot by Silver Creek. Did Blackwood acquire it after our deaths?" Dr. Finch nodded grimly. "He discovered the claim abandoned and bought it from the land office for a pittance not a month after the raid. It was all very convenient. The land office." Ilara said, a plan forming in her mind. "The paperwork. My father was a meticulous man. He kept copies of everything. Is it possible the original filing his signature could still be there?" "It's possible," the doctor admitted. "But the land office is in the same building as the sheriff's. Cobb keeps a close eye on everything." "Then we need to get a look at those records," she said, with a newfound determination. "Doctor, is there anything you can tell us about the men Blackwood employs? Anything that might help?" Dr. Finch hesitated, glancing nervously toward the window. "He has a foreman, a man named Silas Kane. A hard man, with cold, pale eyes. He was a former army scout dishonorably discharged. He and a few others like him are the ones who do Blackwood's dirty work. Be careful, Ilara. These are not men who fight with honor. Pale, cold eyes. The memory from the raid surfaced again, clearer this time. The man she had seen was Silas Kane. The connection solidified in her mind, turning suspicion into certainty. They left the doctor's office with a clearer target, but a more dangerous path. Their plan was simple and reckless. Ilara would go to the land office, claiming to be a distant relative, settling the Vance estate, and ask to see the paperwork for the Silver Creek claim. Nachok would wait outside, a visible deterrent to anyone who might wish to harm her. But his presence would also increase the tension tenfold. Inside the stuffy office, a weaselly clerk eyed her buckskins with disdain. Behind him at a larger desk sat Sheriff Cobb, a large, slovenly man with a sweat-stained shirt and a cruel smile. "Help you?" the clerk asked. "I'd like to see the file on the land claim at Silver Creek," Ilara said, her voice betraying none of her fear. "The one originally filed by William Vance." Sheriff Cobb's eyes narrowed. He slowly pushed his chair back and stood up. "Vance? That claim's been settled, bought and paid for by Mr. Blackwood. Who are you?" "A relative," Ilara lied smoothly. "I'm here to finalize the family's affairs." Cobb walked around the desk, his gaze predatory. "A relative, eh? Funny we heard the whole family was wiped out, and you show up dressed like an Apache squaw with that big red skin waiting outside like a guard dog. You're lying." His hand moved toward the pistol at his hip. Ilara's heart leaped into her throat, but before he could draw, the office door swung open. Nachok filled the doorway, his sheer size seeming to suck the air out of the room. He didn't say a word. He just looked at the sheriff, his expression as hard and unforgiving as granite. Cobb froze, his hand hovering over his gun. He was a bully, but he was not a fool. He knew he was no match for the warrior in front of him. "Get the file." Cobb grunted to the clerk, never taking his eyes off Nachok. The clerk, sweating profusely, fumbled through a cabinet and produced a thin folder. Ilara took it, her hands trembling slightly. Inside she found what she was looking for. Her father's original claim signed in his familiar, elegant script, and beneath it the transfer of ownership to Jebediah Blackwood. The transfer was signed with a crude X and notarized by Sheriff Cobb himself. "My father was a literate man, Sheriff," Ilara said, her voice cold as ice. "He would never have signed with an X. This is a forgery." Cobb's face turned a blotchy red. "That's a dangerous accusation, girl." "It's the truth," she said, holding up the document. "And this is the proof." At that moment, a man with a scarred face and pale, cold eyes entered the office. Silas Kane. He took in the scene at a glance, Ilara with the file, the furious sheriff, and the imposing Apache warrior in the doorway. "Sheriff," Kane said, his voice a low drawl. "Mr. Blackwood wants to see you, and the lady. He invites you both up to his ranch, to clear up this misunderstanding. It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons, a trap." Ilara looked at Nachok. His eyes gave a barely perceptible signal. They were cornered. To refuse was to start a fight they couldn't win in the middle of town. To accept was to walk willingly into the den of the wolf who had murdered her family. "We accept Mr. Blackwood's invitation," Ilara said, her voice ringing with a courage she did not feel. She had her proof, but getting out of Crimson Creek alive with it was another matter entirely. The ride to Jebediah Blackwood's ranch was a silent, tension-filled procession. Silas Kane and two of his rough-looking men rode ahead, while Sheriff Cobb trailed behind his hand, never far from his gun. Ilara and Nachok rode in the middle, caught in the jaws of the trap. The sprawling ranch house came into view, a gaudy two-story monument to stolen wealth looking utterly out of place in the rugged landscape. Jebediah Blackwood was waiting for them on the porch. He was a portly man dressed in a tailored suit that was too tight for his frame. He had a perfectly groomed beard, but his eyes were small and porcine, glittering with avarice. He held a glass of brandy in one hand and smiled a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice oozing a false cordiality. "A pleasure to finally meet you. I was so terribly sorry to hear of your family's tragic encounter with the natives. A true tragedy." He cast a venomous look at Natchok. "And you've brought one of their kind with you. How broad-minded." "Let's dispense with the pleasantries, Mr. Blackwood," Elara said, dismounting. "You know why I'm here." She held up the file from the land office. "This is a forged document. You murdered my family for their land." Blackwood's smile tightened. He took a sip of his brandy. "Bold words. Foolish but bold. You have no proof. Just the word of a hysterical girl who has clearly been addled by the sun and the company she keeps." "I have my father's signature on the original claim," she retorted, "and I have the memory of a man with pale, cold eyes leading the attack." Her gaze flicked to Silas Kane, who stood impassively beside his boss. Blackwood chuckled a low, ugly sound. "Memory is a fickle thing, my dear. And paper burns." He snapped his fingers. Kane and his men moved, surrounding Elara and Natchok, their guns drawn. Sheriff Cobb drew his own pistol, a greasy smile on his face. "Now," Blackwood said, his voice turning hard and cold, "here is what will happen. You will hand over that file. You and your savage friend will ride out of here and never return. If you do, I will offer a bounty for an Apache scalp, so high that every tracker and gunman in this territory will be hunting your people for sport. I will turn this valley into a graveyard. Do you understand my terms? It was a devil's bargain. Her personal justice in exchange for the safety of the people who had saved her." She looked at Natchok, whose face was a mask of controlled fury. He was outnumbered and outgunned. To fight here would be suicide. The weight of the choice pressed down on her. Could she sacrifice her family's memory? Could she let this monster win? She thought of Ishtar, of the children in the camp, of the life she had found there. She could not be the cause of their destruction. With a hand that felt like lead, she held out the file. "And you will leave us alone," she said, her voice choked with defeat. "All of us." "Of course," Blackwood sneered, taking the folder. He opened it, glanced at the forged document, and then with a theatrical flourish tossed the entire file into a nearby brazier. The papers curled, blackened, and were consumed by the flames. Elara watched her only proof turn to ash, a bitter taste filling her mouth. "Now get off my land," Blackwood commanded. As they turned to mount their horses, Silas Kane stepped forward. "The big one stays," he said, his pale eyes fixed on Natchok. "He's a problem. We need to make an example of him." Blackwood considered this for a moment, then shrugged. "Fine, kill him. Make it look like he tried to attack me." The world slowed down. Elara saw the men raise their pistols. She saw the grim acceptance in Natchok's eyes as he prepared to die fighting. In that split second, something inside her broke. The fear, the grief, the submission, it all burned away, replaced by a white-hot, incandescent rage. She had lost her family. She would not lose him. With a scream that was more animal than human, she launched herself not at the gunmen, but at Jebediah Blackwood. She was not a warrior, but she was fueled by a desperate, ferocious love. She crashed into the portly rancher, sending him stumbling backward. The glass of brandy flew from his hand, and he flailed, trying to regain his balance. Her attack was the only distraction Natchok needed. He moved with a speed that was terrifying in a man his size. Before the first shot could be fired, he had seized the rifle from the saddle of his horse. He didn't fire. He used it as a club, a seamless extension of his arm. The barrel crashed against the side of one gunman's head, sending him to the ground. He spun the rifle stock, smashing into Sheriff Cobb's jaw with a sickening crack of bone. Silas Kane, the most experienced of them, got a shot off. The bullet tore through the fleshy part of Nachok's shoulder, a searing line of pain. Nachok grunted, but didn't falter. He lunged forward, grabbing Kane's gun hand and twisting. The pistol clattered to the porch as the scout cried out in pain. Nachok drove his fist into Kane's stomach, doubling him over, then brought his knee up into the man's face. Ilara, meanwhile, was wrestling with Blackwood, who was trying to push her away. He was stronger, but she was relentless, clawing and kicking. He finally shoved her to the ground and drew a small derringer from his coat pocket. He leveled it at her head. "You stupid little—" A shadow fell over him. Nachok stood there, bleeding and breathing heavily, but radiating a lethal calm. Blackwood's eyes widened in terror. "It is over!" Nachok said, his voice a low growl of thunder. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the chaos, the thunder of approaching hooves. A group of riders crested the nearby hill, moving at a full gallop. At their head was the hawk-faced warrior, Geron. And behind him were a dozen of the tribe's best fighters. Geron had followed them, whether out of suspicion, a desire to see Nachok fail, or a grudging sense of loyalty he had come. He and his warriors reined in their horses, a silent, deadly circle of archers, their arrows all aimed at Blackwood and his remaining terrified men. Checkmate. Geron looked from the scene of carnage to Nachok, then to Ilara on the ground. A flicker of something surprise, perhaps even respect, crossed his stern features. Blackwood, seeing his advantage utterly evaporate, began to babble. "This is a misunderstanding. We can make a deal. I have money gold." Nachok ignored him. He walked over to Ilara and gently helped her to her feet. He looked at the bleeding wound on his shoulder, then back at her, his dark eyes searching her face. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice soft. "No," she whispered, her body trembling with adrenaline. "I'm not hurt." They stood there for a moment, surrounded by defeated enemies and unexpected allies, the dust settling around them. The proof was gone, but the truth had been laid bare in a crucible of violence. Her old life was avenged not by a court of law, but by the raw justice of the Wild West, and by the courage of the man she loved. The ride back from Crimson Creek was one of quiet triumph. Escorted by Geron and his warriors, they returned not as fugitives, but as victors. Jebediah Blackwood's power was broken, a truth that would now bleed through the valley, leaving him isolated and exposed. At the camp, their arrival became legend. Geron, in a stunning act of reconciliation, approached Ilara before the elders. "Your heart is strong, Ijagonwe," he declared, giving her the name Woman of Courage. With that single act, her place among the people was cemented forever. The whispers of suspicion were gone, replaced by murmurs of awe. The ghosts of her past were finally at peace, and for the first time, Ilara felt the profound, grounding sense of being truly home. An unspoken question, however, still lingered in the air between her and Nachok. One evening, as the moon cast a silver glow over the canyon, he led her to the high ridge where they could see the stars stretching into infinity. "You came to us a ghost," Nachok said, his voice a deep murmur in the stillness. "A symbol of a pain I could not heal. But you have become the heart of this camp. You quieted the spirits of my past by showing me a new future." He took her hands, his large, calloused fingers enveloping hers. You begged me to take you as your wife out of desperation. I refused. Now I ask you, Ilara Ijagonwi, not out of duty or pity, but because my spirit recognizes yours. Will you be my wife? Tears of pure joy traced paths through the dust on her cheeks. She had no words, only an action that spoke 1,000 truths. Ilara rose on her toes and met his lips a kiss that sealed their shared past and promised a new dawn. She had wandered into this desert, a starving, broken girl begging for a life. Now, wrapped in the arms of the giant who had saved her, she had found where her heart belonged. She was no longer a ghost, but a woman of courage, the cherished wife of a great warrior, her life not just saved, but reborn. The story of Ilara and Nachok reminds us that our true strength is often forged in our moments of greatest desperation. Their journey shows that love can bloom in the most barren of landscapes, bridging the deepest cultural divides and healing the most painful wounds. It's a powerful testament to the idea that family isn't always about the blood you're born with, but the people who stand with you when you have nothing left. Their lives were transformed not by magic, but by a courageous choice, a choice to see the human being behind the label, the spirit behind the stranger. If their incredible story of survival, justice, and love moved you, please take a moment to support our channel. Hit that like button to let us know you enjoyed it. Share this video with someone who loves a powerful historical drama, and most importantly, subscribe and ring the bell so you won't miss our next story from the forgotten pages of history. Thank you for listening.